The last topic for today is one that is going to set a few people's hair on fire. And I titled it Legislative Attempts to Legalize Corruption. There's quite a few of them. The first one is, I said at the outset everything was probably good legislation. This is the section where it's bad legislation, really bad legislation, very transparently bad legislation. The first one is House Bill 307 by Representative Kyle Green, and it would authorize the governor and legislators to accept and deposit campaign contributions during the session. And you mentioned this yesterday, Chris, I believe, on Warrior Wednesday, but it is transparently, nakedly corrupt.
It's unbelievable, Danielle, because right now, some people would argue, many would argue, that our restrictions on campaign donations and political influence generally in the legislative process is far too permissive in the state of Louisiana. But at least on the books now, there are laws that prohibit legislators from accepting campaign cash in the middle of a legislative session or having fundraisers for them in the middle of a legislative session when they're considering and debating and voting on critical items of legislation. Also, currently in law is at least a prohibition that prohibits the governor himself from accepting campaign donations and largesse in cash for 60 days. It's either 30 or 60 days after the legislative session ends, while he's considering whether he's going to sign legislation or veto legislation. You know what Kyle Green's legislation does? Completely dismantles those guardrails entirely. So legislators in the middle of a session can be voting on something during the day, or they have a vote coming up on something the next day, but they're going to a fundraiser the night before that's hosted by the industry or the agency or the company that wants that legislation to pass. I cannot imagine why any Republican would consider voting for this. This is an absolute insult to transparency in the state of Louisiana. And it would dismantle the very few guardrails that still exist in Louisiana with respect to separating the legislative and the governing process from the corruptive influence of money. I don't want anybody voting for this garbage. And I'm curious, Danielle, who is behind this? I want to know who's behind this.
I guess we'll find out.
I wonder if it's Kyle Green. I wonder if it's Kyle Green himself who came up with this idea. I would like to know that. And guess what? We can find out.
Okay. Well, I think, Chris, I think we'll see. If this bill moves, if this bill makes significant moves in the legislature, we know who's complicit in it, right? Because the Speaker of the House decides what bills move. Now, you can shut it down. He could make it so this bill never even gets assigned, that it doesn't get picked up by committee. I have a feeling it will get picked up by the committee. Now, the committee would be House Governmental Affairs, House and Governmental Affairs, most probably, Chris, would deal with this. I would think, look, House and Governmental Affairs Committee, you better shut this down.
I mean, you better shut this thing down. You better shut this thing down quickly.
Yeah. And the next one is almost as disgusting, but in a different way. House Bill 210 by Representative Michael Mellerin would change the ethics laws to allow public board members to be employed by a firm that has a contractual or financial relationship with that entity.
Yeah,
what could go wrong, Chris?
Local boards in Louisiana, and I don't think it applies to all boards, but certain boards and commissions in Louisiana. You can have someone sitting on that board or on that commission, and they have a wife or a nephew and they themselves, I believe, right, Danielle? They themselves are employed by a company that has a financial or a contractual or a business relationship with the board on which they are a voting member. And they do not have to disclose that either to the ethics board or to the board on which they serve. What could be the purpose of this? Do you think it's appropriate, Danielle, for anybody to be serving on a board and also be employed by a company that has a financial relationship with that board? Well, but the law says that they have to recuse themselves from any vote that has to do with that employer. They can't participate in that vote. Who cares There are personal relationships that develop when you're a member of a board. You can exert implicit, even implied influence on your colleagues on a board. It doesn't matter whether you specifically vote on something or not. You shouldn't be able to conceal that type of a relationship from the public, from the ethics board, or from the board on which you serve. It's a direct conflict of interest, and it does absolutely nothing to enhance public confidence in the transparency of our public agencies.
No, and I think this is why we see a lot of retirees on public boards, Chris, because those relationships have no longer should have any, at least tangible benefit, right? I mean, if you were employed by a company for 25 years, you may have an affinity to them. You may hate them with the fire of 1,000 suns, but they're not explicitly paying your bills day to day. They're not going to be giving you a bonus on contracts signed by the board. I think there's a significant number of very qualified retirees in the state of Louisiana, or people who have changed industries that can sit on these public boards. The fact, I don't think this is appropriate in any way, and I defy Representative Mellerin to give me an example where I would be able to change my mind.
Yeah, me as well. It just seems to be pretty facially obvious. I know Mellerin is a Republican, but unless someone comes up with some irrefutable argument of why this is good, which I think is going to be very hard for me to do, certainly in light of our current culture and climate, we're going to oppose this vigorously.
Yeah. And then the next bill is not too dissimilar, Chris. House Bill 250 by Representative Chris Turner. Is Chris Turner?
Yeah.
I think it's Chris Turner. And it's saying that conflict of interest information by members of boards of commission or commissions, basically, if a member of the immediate family of a member of a board or commission does not have to disclose their connection to a contracting firm. And you'll do a better job of explaining this, Chris. But it's basically like if somebody's wife or husband is employed by an entity that is contracted by the board, you don't have to disclose that. Is that insane?
Yeah. It's very similar to Mellerin's bill, only it specifically applies to your wife or your son or your nephew. So you're serving on a commission or on a board on an agency, and your wife has a contractual relationship with a company that is, doing business with the board. You don't have to disclose that to the ethics board. You don't have to disclose that to the board on which you serve. Why would that not be something that is required to be disclosed? I don't understand that. What's the motive for this?
Well, we saw recently, Chris, where in California, Governor Gavin Newsom was funneling tens of millions of dollars into I believe, a foundation that his wife was running. I think that look, it's just, we don't need more opportunities for corruption in this state. We're trying to chip away at the opportunities for corruption that already exist, and they are many. So
Exactly. Danielle, when you really get down to this, when you think about this, the only inference to be made from some of this legislation is that these legislators want to clear a path on some level to do things that are ethically questionable. And the reason why these prohibitions exist currently is precisely for that reason. And we're not suggesting that there's actual impropriety in every case, but there is absolutely the appearance of impropriety in these cases that make these ethics rules more lax. And 9 times out of 10, it will lead to actual impropriety. And that's the problem.